All right, here we are. Aloha, students. Here I am in my home, in my office. I'll give you a tour of this later. But we're going to continue our discussion of pre-written history today. We're going to get to this map right here. It's called the Map of Homo Sapien Movement, and will be a continuation of what you saw yesterday. I'm going to give you some YouTube videos, 3 YouTube videos to check out as well. Okay? All right, so here we go. Hopefully you have this map. I would just say that if you are had to have these sent to you and you don't have a hard copy of this, you can just trace it out. I think you'll just be just fine. Now, before I go forward, I wanted to jump back and discuss these. Yesterday, or we took a look at some skulls. So I thought you might be interested in seeing some more skulls of pre-written history humans. Now you should recognize that's one of the definite ones that you have. You were given in your picture gallery yesterday, Australopithecus boci, and you can sort of see the coloration of that thing. And one of the things I sort of want to make a point here is if you look at some of these pre-written history humans, human species, and remember these are all different species of humans. Again, a couple things I'm trying to point out to you here is that, and in many cases, these species do not have very big brains. They do not have very big skull cavities is really the word. How about this one? All right, and these are all Australopithecines. But what we start to see, and there's a couple of Australopithecines that maybe their brains get a little bit bigger. Okay, they get a little bit larger. But generally, Australopithecines do not have very large brains, and it's when you start to get into the line. I call them the. It's just a scientific name here, the Homo line. Okay, and you sort of start to see this group. You can see that these brains are a lot larger. Okay, there's the species that was probably on Earth the longest, Homo erectus. All right, and you can see that some of these they barely have any remains of them. And there's our friends the Neanderthals, and you can see they had some big brains and some big teeth apparently as well. And then here you have sort of a Homo sapien brain, and sort of my point of this whole thing was to try to rebuild or to discuss the competition for food between them. And what I would also say is one of the big things that historians are doing these days is they are recreating faces of famous people from history. Like you can watch shows in which they rebuild the face of George Washington based on his remains. His teeth still remain, and pictures of him. They've rebuilt King Tut. They've tried to rebuild his face. They did it with Jesus. Sometimes it's done by computer, sometimes it's done with clay. But just check this one out. So here's Homo erectus, and look what National Geographic did. Sure enough, they rebuilt what he probably looked like as when his species existed on Earth. Okay. Here's Homo habilis right there. That's one of the other super famous ones. All right. And one of the things I sort of tried to point out to you yesterday with pre-written history was that there's this notion that there was a straight line, okay, of evolution. But really what we should think about is that there is no straight line of evolution. There's this difficult question of where Homo sapien came from. I'm just sort of reviewing, I guess, here. And you can see that these lines are not straight. Now you may say, well, what do you mean, Mr. Brian? Well, here's a National Geographic. This one is about 5 years old now, and they've just they had found another set of remains. But if you take a look, here's an example of a timeline, sort of similar to what I drew for you yesterday. And here you have the Australopithecine line, and here you have the Homo line, and here's Homo sapiens that make it to the end. And here's Neanderthals that almost make it. But you can see this is nothing in a straight line. There is no straight continuation. There is no implication that this is absolutely this one evolved into this one, evolved into this one, evolved into this one, evolved into that one. There is no indication, and even National Geographic is making this argument. So where does Homo sapien come from? And look, again, this, I don't know the answer. I'm just telling you that this is very interesting and a very hot topic and a very debatable topic, I think, which is very fair to bring up as well. Okay? But I think it's certainly a very interesting topic. Okay? All right, so now let's get on with Homo sapien. Let's get on with it. Let's continue our discussion of how Homo sapien emerges. If you recall, I said there was you could call it an elimination tournament. Eventually, all of you who play sports should understand this. All of you who play sports realize that if there's a tournament, there's one winner. One team comes out of the tournament and wins. So I'm not saying that Homo sapien defeated Australopithecus africanus because they were not on Earth at the same time, but Homo sapien is the only species, Homo erectus to a degree, to populate the entire planet. And I will grant you, and I would be the first to say, that Homo sapien had the biggest brain of all of those groups of all those species you just saw. So my point of my argument that I'm trying to make here today to you all is that Homo sapien is the one who did it. All right? We are all Homo sapiens. We are the ones who did it. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Before I start this whole thing, I'm going to make a little notation here. I'm going to use the letters BP. This is going to stand for before present. Now, as we get along into the study of world history, you'll hear BC or AD, which you're probably familiar with, and those have to do with the life of Christ. So these are so far back that we're not going to mess with our recent 2000. We're just going to say before present, before today. And what I would say to you is, ladies and gentlemen, is that Homo sapiens seems to have arisen. And again, I don't care what you think, okay? Evolved to its form, appeared, was dropped off from a spaceship. I mean, I don't think that, but I mean, I'm just saying, we see the oldest remains of Homo sapien right here in Central Africa. And the oldest remains of Homo sapiens ever found are about 200,000 years BP. In other words, what I'm saying is the oldest Homo sapien remains are right here in Africa. And they are 200,000 years old. How do they know, Mr. Bryant? Well, there's this thing called carbon dating. I think I mentioned that to you. And what does Homo sapien do? He spreads himself. He spreads that species across the continent of Africa. All right, now, eventually what happens is that the amount of Homo sapiens gets to the point where some leave the continent of Africa and they cross through the Middle East and what we would call into just Southwest Asia, really. And what we see here is the oldest Homo sapien remains are about 100,000 years old. Okay? Now, what does this mean? This means that the scientists have assumed and have hypothesized that since the oldest Homo sapien remains in this part of the world are 100,000 years old and not any older, and you have 200,000-year-old remains here, this implies, the implication is Homo sapien must have moved from here to here. And it was only, there's never been a 200,000-year-old Homo sapien remain found in this part of the world. All right? Now, is there still Homo sapiens here? Yes, there are. All right? The next movement is in what we would call in the Southeast Asia, and these Homo sapien remains are about 70,000 years old, years BP. All right? So you can see, well, let's zoom in here. Maybe this may be easier for you. Okay? You can see that this is happening. It's going. All right? Okay? The next distance, we see Australia, remains of Homo sapien remains, the oldest ones ever found there, are about 50,000 years old. All right? Now, how did they get there, Mr. O'Brien? Well, there's several theories. The level of the seas could have been lower. They could have literally walked. They could have been inventing things by this time to get themselves, like boats, to get themselves to this place. All right? So still we are quite a long ways away. Now, I would also argue, where do you see them hanging out? You're hanging out in the warm parts of the world. All right. Now, the next place they're going to go is they're going to go north, and we see that this move from south central, southwestern Asia is going to eventually move into Europe. The oldest remains we see of Homo sapiens is about 40,000 years old, years BP. All right. Now, one of the things I've noticed, who did they run into here? Who did they come upon? Well, they came upon our old friends, the Neanderthals. And the Neanderthals had apparently been there maybe close to 100,000 years in Europe by that time. And here we have a situation where we see that competition. That's a 40, everyone. Okay? All right, and we see this competition between Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalis. All right? And this was a little bit more of a move to the north here. What we would call Russia, Siberia, northern Mongolia, even we could call it that. We would say 25,000 years BP. All right? And now what do you see? We have Homo sapiens across the globe, if you will. Homo sapiens have officially made it all the way across, well, not the globe, but at least the eastern hemisphere. How does that sound? Okay, now, where is obviously the only place left for them to go? Well, obviously to what we would call today, not the last place, but the Americas are going to be next, okay? And so what we see, what most scientists agree is what happens is we start to see a move across what is called the Bering Sea, the Bering Strait, where humans went across here and into what we call North America. And we've got some older remains here, about 15 to 20,000 years BP up here. All right, there's some evidence they probably had to come along the coastline. And part of this is, first of all, how did they walk? I just gave it away. How did they get across here? Well, they probably walked. And they did one of two things. They either walked across ice, because this was iced over and there was a land bridge, or, again, the water level was so low that they were able to walk on land. There's some discussion about when they actually got to what we would call Alaska, there was a lot of ice and they couldn't get past it. So how did they have to get past the like 2 and 3 miles thickness of ice all the way down to what we would call Minnesota, all the way down here? How would they have to get past that? They would have to go along the coast. All right? And this is really, this is also controversial. I'll share that with you in a moment. And then we see that the last sort of continent upon which humans arrived is South America, and we're talking about a mere 10 to 15,000 years ago, BP. Okay? All right, and then we should not forget that there's another aspect of the world that is going to get populated. All right, and this area of the world, I think you're all, you should all be very well familiar with what I'm doing here. To the air about. And of course, that is our drawing of the Polynesian Triangle, and there is a discussion that these islands in this area, Oceania, Polynesian Triangle, whatever you would prefer to refer to it as, somewhere between 5,000 and 1,000 years BP, and most accepted thought is that people came from the eastern hemisphere into this area to do this. All right. Okay. So now this is this seems all well and good and nice and simple and wonderful. What if I would tell you that this is extremely controversial and there's lots of questions about this? This is sort of, shall I say, what is relatively accepted science. Now, one of the things that you will discover about science and frankly history is it's always up for debate and there's always questions about it. And what I would sort of say to you all is that you should accept that and grasp onto that and be happy about that, because I don't think you should ever just accept something as it is, especially when it comes to science or history. You should always ask questions. So, for example, what do you mean, Mr. O'Brien? What are some of the controversial things? What are some of the controversial aspects of this map? Well, holy cow, there's a whole bunch. For example, let's see, maybe you're aware of this, is that ocean currents in the northern hemisphere rotate like this, what I would call clockwise. So as you can see, in the northern hemisphere, they would therefore rotate thusly. Okay, so on the other side of my map, they would come like this. Now you can probably already see what I'm talking about here. There's a lot of discussion and debate about the Americas and how populated they were. The question is, were there Homo sapiens in the Americas way before this, like tens of thousands of years before this? If there were, how did they get there? Because this is a relatively, dare I say, recent phenomenon. Well, what could they have done? They could have come from Africa, okay? They could have come from Europe, and how would they have gotten to the Americas? Well, you can see they could have gotten to the Americas by coming along the ocean currents, all right? Likewise, you could argue if there was a land bridge, if there was a lower level of oceans at this point at some particular time, could there have been that beforehand? Could people from Northern Europe walked across to the Americas earlier than 20, even earlier than 20,000, way earlier than 20,000 years ago? All right, and of course, some of you are aware of the fact that there are discussions about great civilizations that existed that were destroyed by natural phenomena. Okay, because basically what I would say to you is all the Homo sapiens I'm talking about here are, for the most part, hunter-gatherer types. What we sort of say as high civilization, and what this course will be studying as far as quote-unquote civilizations, is a really recent phenomenon, started basically, for lack of a better way of putting it, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 years ago. And they started where? They started over here in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, and the Indus Valley, and in China. This is where they started. So could you have advanced civilizations over here? A lot of people believe, yes, you could have. All right. One of the things we'll eventually get into this course, there is a controversy about how was the Polynesian Triangle filled up with people? Well, a lot of people believe this is difficult to fathom, because where would they be coming from? They're coming from the west. What would they be going against? They would be going against the current. So there is a discussion about filling up the Polynesian Triangle from the Americas as well. And how did they do that? Well, I should probably add the ocean current in the southern hemisphere rotates counterclockwise. You can do that over here if you would like as well. Okay. Certainly here. Okay, just like so. All right, and then we've got the world really going, don't we? So we have controversies where? We have controversies in the Western Hemisphere. When did people arrive in the Western Hemisphere? Was it a mere 15, 20,000 years ago? Was it sometime before, okay, way before, from people coming from Africa or Europe, the Eastern Hemisphere generally, coming on the currents? How did the Polynesian Triangle get filled up? Relatively recently. Did people go against the currents? Did they come with the currents? So super interesting questions, and these things are highly debated to this very day. One of the big things I don't have drawn on this is the big island of Greenland. Maybe I should add Greenland here. But Greenland is right here, isn't it? Well, I don't know if you knew this, but there's been a discovery on Greenland of a huge meteor crater, an impact crater up there. And the reason why it's only recently been found is it's been covered in ice, so people couldn't observe it from airplanes or space or anything like that. But now technology is such that you can map these things that are happening underneath the ice. So guess what they've mapped up here in Greenland? A big meteor impact crater. Well, they're basically, there's a discussion that some great civilization that predates all of these things, all of these, not necessarily over here, but certainly predates these areas over here, some great civilization which was way ahead of things and was already doing agriculture. And again, as I commented, this is all hunter-gatherers here. Some great civilization somewhere along the way was destroyed by this natural disaster. Maybe it was a meteor, maybe it wasn't. Now, some people say, what about Pangea, Mr. O'Brien? What about all those continents that fit together? Have you ever seen this theory? Pangea was a theory. If you take a look at the coast, okay, so check this out. So if you look at the coast of Africa here, okay? Well, if you look very carefully at that, what do you notice about, see this curvature right here? Well, what do you notice about this curvature right here? See this indentation right here? Well, what do you notice about this indentation right here? You can see that at one time, and this is the theory of Pangea, that the continents were all stuck together. There was only one big continent, and what did they do? They broke apart. Like you can see that this would have been attached right here. India is a big, huge chunk of Africa that broke off from Africa and slammed into Asia. And if you think about the Himalaya mountains, of course that would make sense, because as this landmass slammed into this, it crumpled up and crunched up all this area of land and made mountains. All right. Did you know that there's a lot of oil off the coast of South America right here? Well, guess where they're looking for oil and finding it? Off the coast of Africa right here. So that's a theory of Pangea, that if there was oil here, I bet there's oil here. And sure enough, that's exactly what they've sort of discovered. Well, I would say that doesn't have anything to do with this, because the dates I'm talking about, okay, I'm talking about a small little sliver of this line. I'm talking about a tiny little sliver. I'm talking about only 200,000 years ago. Okay, so we're right in here, whereas this was millions of years ago. So we can go back to this, and what can we determine? What can we sort of say about this? We can say, well, how long have human species of various types existed on Earth? About 6 million years ago. Only about 6 million years. All right. When was Pangea, you may ask? Well, that was like 300 million years ago. So it's not like a bunch of Homo sapiens were over here and they actually walked over here and they were there, and then this broke off and these humans got stuck there. That's too old. Pangea is like 300 million years old. Did these humans ever deal with dinosaurs, Mr. O'Brien? No. Again, various species of humans, only 6 million years on Earth. Dinosaurs, you're talking about 25 to 100 plus million years ago being on Earth. So all those sort of shows that you have seen are not the case. Okay? All right, now, I'm going to finish this out with, I'm going to give you a little small task to do, and that is to go watch some YouTube videos, 3 of them to be exact, and I will post this on Canvas, but here they are, so you can have them in front of you. And these are about pre-written history humans, okay? And I'm going to emphasize one specifically. One of the great archaeologists of all time is a guy named Louis Leakey. He's the father of modern anthropology, so this is a short little 5-minute to watch. These, again, are YouTube videos. This is the one I want to make a big deal of right here. I think you'll like this. There's two clips from this one, and this has to do with this woman right here. Her name is Jane Goodall, and Jane Goodall is super famous for studying chimpanzees in the wild. And the reason why she was interested in the study of chimpanzees is because of this timeline, and the argument being, who are humans' closest cousins? Well, other primates, the apes, the gorillas, the chimpanzees. So she has spent her whole life studying chimpanzees in Africa, and she's world renowned. Here she is. She's deep in her 80s, I believe. She's got to be over 80 now. Okay, there you can see her with some gray hair. So the second video you will watch will be 2 clips of her, Jane Goodall, among the wild chimpanzees. And then this other thing I think you'll find interesting is this discussion about okay, Neanderthals and Homo sapiens were around at the exact same time. They obviously had an overlap here. Did they interbreed? Well, I think most people agree that they probably did. They were different species of humans, but they probably interbred. So this is a little thing where they take various people from different parts of the world, particularly the Eastern Hemisphere, and they basically do a DNA test on them. I don't know if they take blood or if they do a saliva swab, but they check out the genetic ancestry, and they're able to figure out if somebody has some Neanderthal in them. And I can tell you, I'll just give a little bit of it away, people who have European ancestry definitely, almost in all cases, have Neanderthal in their DNA chain. Okay, so there you can go. You can pause on that. Again, I'll post these. But there you go, folks. The map of Homo sapien movement. Okay, hope you enjoyed that. Hope you liked it. And we'll be having one more day of discussion about pre-written history specifically. And I hope you enjoyed the YouTube videos. Okay, talk to you again next time. Aloha.